The Tycoon's gaze lingered on her longer than anyone dared. The restaurant faded around them, the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, even the music. Everything blurred except Valeria. He leaned in, voice low, deliberate, almost dangerous. "Be my wife tonight." Valeria's breath caught, not from fear, not from shock, but from something deeper. Calculation, defiance, a spark of audacity no one ever noticed in her. He had made impossible demands before, but this one required a choice, a risk. A single word that could change everything. She parted her lips. The room seemed to hold its breath. The Tycoon waited, confident, unshakable, and completely unprepared. Because the word she whispered next stunned him. Carmen Valeria Ruiz moved like a shadow through Le Bernardin's gleaming dining room, balancing 2 plates of halibut as if they were fragile secrets. Candlelight skimmed over polished glass and silver, catching the faint tremor in her hands. The room hummed with careful laughter, wine-loosened voices, the whisper of linen sleeves. Somewhere near the bar, a maitre d' laughed too loudly. Carmen kept her gaze low, pretending she didn't hear her name in that laugh. Her name tag read only Valeria. Black letters pressed into cheap plastic, pretending authority it didn't have. Most guests didn't look past the tray in her hands, but when they did, they saw whatever they wanted. The accent, the brown skin, the tired eyes. A woman in a silk dress snapped her fingers once, twice, as if summoning a thought instead of a person, and Valeria answered anyway because that was what the job required. The humiliation came in small doses, like salt scattered over a wound. A mispronounced name here, a lingering stare there, an extra comment that sounded like praise but landed like a judgment. Tonight, though, it felt heavier, thick in the air with the smell of truffle butter and seared fish. Maybe it was the way the manager's eyes kept tracking her up and down, weighing plates and posture, pretending it was only performance he evaluated. "Table 16, move," Marco hissed from behind the pass, shoving a ticket toward her with 2 sauce-slicked fingers. "They've been waiting. You're slowing down the turn." His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. The line cooks heard, the runner heard, the bartender looked over. Their glances brushed against her like grease, leaving a residue. Valeria took the plates, spine straightening, every step deliberate, as if grace could erase his words. At table 16, a hedge fund couple leaned toward each other, lit by their own importance. The man's watch could have paid her rent for months. The woman's bracelet a year. Valeria set down the plates with practiced precision, describing the reduction and the seasonal garnish in a voice that sounded almost detached. The woman didn't listen. Her gaze dropped to Valeria's sneakers, just visible beneath the black slacks, and her mouth curled. "Those shoes are brave," the woman said, loud enough for the neighboring table to hear. A little titter of laughter flared, died. "They let you wear anything here now?" Her partner smirked into his wine glass. Heat climbed Valeria's throat, pooling under her cheeks. The sneakers were clean, scuffed at the edges, the only pair that didn't blister her feet by midnight. She offered a small, professional smile, the first armor she ever learned. "We prioritize comfort for long shifts, ma'am," she replied softly. Her voice stayed steady, betraying none of the sting. The woman's eyes flicked up, surprised that the waitress had dared to answer with anything resembling dignity. For a heartbeat, Valeria felt an old instinct rise, the one that wanted to apologize simply for existing in someone else's curated evening. She swallowed it down. She would not hand them that, not tonight. Back at the service station, she felt the laughter before she heard it. The busser, a kid barely 19, flicked his eyes toward her and quickly away, ashamed to be caught enjoying the show. Marco leaned against the counter, telling a story that hinged on an impression of her accent. Vowels dragged and reshaped until they no longer resembled her. The others chuckled, hands busy with cutlery, as if that made them innocent. C told them, priority of comfort. Marco mimicked, exaggerating every syllable, rolling the R like a joke. Como si fuera dueña del restaurante. As the sentence broke into laughter, his gaze slid over, landed squarely on her. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. Valeria picked up a stack of bread plates, fingers careful, movements absurdly composed. "Table 9 needs water," she said. It was the only thing she could trust herself to say. Humiliation didn't always arrive as shouting. Sometimes it was this, a shared joke, a phrase in another language weaponized by someone who wore it more comfortably. She had grown up translating bills for her mother, letters from landlords, instructions from schools. Words were supposed to be tools, not knives. Yet here, in the glow of a 3-Michelin-starred room, every word she spoke seemed to sharpen itself on someone else's amusement. A table by the windows waved her over with 2 fingers, as though shooing a fly. Outside, Manhattan glowed in glass and steel, each building a vertical river of light. Inside, chandeliers cast warm halos over the rich and almost rich, every detail curated to make them feel chosen. Valeria knew the choreography by heart. Approach, smile, anticipate needs before they were voiced. Tonight, for some reason, each part of that dance scraped. "Excuse me," a man in a navy suit said, gesturing toward his empty glass. "We've been waiting forever." Forever, she knew, had started precisely 6 minutes and 22 seconds earlier. She kept time in her bones now. "I'll refresh that right away," she answered. The man sighed theatrically, leaning back as though granting clemency. His date looked past Valeria, eyes already searching for someone else to blame if the evening felt anything less than perfect. At the bar, Lucia, one of the senior waitresses, caught Valeria's wrist gently. "You're fine," she murmured, barely moving her lips. "They're in a mood because someone important is coming tonight." Her eyes flicked toward the front entrance where the host stand gleamed like a gate. "Big reservation, private investor. No mistakes, that's all anyone cares about." Valeria poured the wine, the bottle steady against her palm, even as curiosity pinched at her thoughts. Someone important. The phrase moved through the staff like a current, subtle but undeniable. The bartender lined up crystal glasses with near religious care. The manager straightened his tie between tables, scanning the room as if rehearsing apologies in advance. Even the kitchen noise changed, shifting from frantic to focused. Valeria felt it in her ribs, that tightening of air before a storm. She wondered briefly what it would be like to matter that much. She didn't have time to linger on the thought. A dropped fork, a misfired order, a guest who swore they'd asked for medium rare instead of medium pulled her back into the relentless present. Hours in this room stretched and collapsed in strange ways. Some nights she went home and remembered every face. Other nights, like this one, the faces blurred, but the words stuck, clinging like smoke to the lining of her lungs. Between seatings, she stole 30 seconds in the narrow hallway near the restrooms, where the light was softer and the noise became a muffled ocean. She checked her phone. 2 unread messages from her mother, one from the landlord. The subject line alone, RE rent adjustment, made her stomach tighten. She didn't open it. Out here, she was an extension of the restaurant, not someone whose future could be rearranged by a single email. She slid the phone back into her apron just as the manager appeared at the end of the hallway, his silhouette framed by the brighter dining room. "Valeria," he called, using the name on her tag, not the one she heard at home. "Front of house, now." His tone tried to sound neutral, but urgency edged it. For a second, irrational panic seized her. Had someone complained formally? Had she slipped without noticing? She stepped back into the main room, the restaurant swallowing her whole again. The host stand had transformed into a small theater. The staff clustered nearby under the pretense of straightening menus, checking reservations, adjusting place cards that had already been aligned. Beyond the glass doors, a black car idled at the curb, sleek and patient. Valeria's heart ticked faster, not from excitement, but from the way everyone seemed to be holding their breath. "Investors here," the manager murmured, smoothing his expression into something deferential. "Remember, flawless service. No chatter, no lingering. He values efficiency." His gaze landed on Valeria for a fraction longer than anyone else. She understood what he was really saying. "Do not be noticed. Do not embarrass us. Stay useful, invisible, quiet." She nodded once. She had spent years perfecting that role, even on nights when it scraped parts of her spirit raw. The doors opened with a soft hydraulic sigh, letting in a slice of winter air and city noise. Then he stepped inside. The Tycoon did not look like the caricatures she'd seen on screens. No cartoonish arrogance, no loud displays. His presence was quieter, heavier, the kind that made the room unconsciously rearrange around him. Valeria watched from beside the host stand. unaware that his gaze would find her long before the night ended. The Tycoon entered the restaurant with a presence that felt almost architectural, as though the room rearranged itself around him without permission. The low murmur of conversations shifted, not silenced but softened, as if every guest sensed an unexpected variable altering the evening's rhythm. Valeria steadied the tray in her hands, keeping her expression neutral. She had served celebrities, politicians, CEOs, yet none had carried that quiet density, the kind that made the air feel newly aware of itself. He removed his coat slowly, not out of vanity but intention, folding the fabric with quiet precision before handing it to the host. The gesture drew no attention from him, yet everyone around seemed to notice. Guests glanced up with subtle curiosity, the kind that pretended disinterest while betraying fascination. Valeria knew this type. Powerful men whose silence spoke louder than any performance. Still, something about him unsettled her more deeply than the usual hierarchy of wealth. The manager approached him with a smile too polished to be sincere, the kind reserved for donors, high critics, and men with the ability to alter the staff's employment overnight. "We're honored you joined us again," he said. Again. That single word surprised her. She hadn't known he was a returning guest. She wondered how many nights he had walked through these doors while she worked unseen in the back, aligning cutlery and memorizing wine regions she could never afford. He nodded once. Not dismissive, not warm, simply acknowledging the statement. His gaze traveled through the dining room with the patience of someone accustomed to reading entire narratives in a single glance. When it passed over Valeria, she felt a tightening in her chest, an almost imperceptible shift, as though he had caught a detail the room overlooked. She looked away instantly, afraid he might interpret her curiosity as presumption. Lucia drifted beside her, carrying a tray of champagne flutes. "That's him," she whispered, voice barely above breath. "The one everyone pretends not to notice while noticing everything." Valeria didn't answer. She was focused on the way the Tycoon moved. Not slowly, not hurriedly, but with purpose shaped by years of controlling outcomes. His presence radiated something the wealthy rarely possessed. Restraint. That, more than money, felt dangerous. The Tycoon was led to the window table reserved hours earlier. The city glowed behind him in layered reflections, tall buildings shimmering across the glass like overlapping ghosts. Two suited executives stood awkwardly, greeting him with handshakes that trembled at the edges. Their attempts at confidence faltered, revealing a fear of disappointing someone whose opinion could dismantle their futures. The Tycoon accepted their greetings without ceremony and took his seat. Valeria approached with water, careful to maintain poise. As she poured, their conversation drifted toward her ears in broken fragments. Numbers, projected timelines, whispered terms she didn't recognize. Their voices carried an urgency disguised as professionalism. The Tycoon's tone, however, remained even, steady, almost clinical. When a page in their folder shifted, she glimpsed an address printed in bold. Recognition struck her like a breath knocked from the lungs. It was her street. Her hand trembled slightly, just enough for the Tycoon to notice. His eyes lifted to her face with quiet precision. "Thank you," he said softly. The words weighted with something she couldn't identify. Gratitude, observation, warning. She stepped back with a polite nod, heart hammering. Why was her building listed in a packet belonging to men discussing investment strategies? Why was something so fragile to her treated as a negotiable variable? Back at the service station, she pulled out her phone, finally opening the landlord's email she had feared all night. "Change of ownership and rent adjustment," the subject read. She swallowed hard. The timing felt cruelly aligned with the conversation she'd overheard. Lucia glanced over. "You okay?" she asked. Valeria forced a smile. "Just tired." Tired covered everything. Fear, shame, the slow unraveling of stability. The kitchen pass filled with plates destined for the Tycoon's table. Chef's tension was unmistakable, every garnish aligned with obsessive accuracy. Marco thrust 2 plates into Valeria's hands. "Don't drop these," he muttered. "These men decide cities." She stabilized the plates, ignoring the comment. Cities weren't her concern. Maintaining the single-bedroom apartment where her mother slept, that was her world. A world that suddenly felt precariously suspended. When she reached the table, the executives were in the middle of an enthusiastic pitch. "With this acquisition, we can remove holdovers immediately," one said. "Renovations will triple profits. The neighborhood's ripe for transformation." Holdovers, a cold, hollow term for people with nowhere else to go. The Tycoon arched an eyebrow but didn't respond. Valeria set the plates down silently, resisting the urge to recoil at the language used so casually. One executive flipped a page, revealing the building diagram she recognized too well. Hallway layouts, rent columns, projected demolition dates. Valeria's breath snagged, her entire life rendered as bullet points. Her mother's medicine, her own night classes, their small routines, reduced to coordinate grids. She stepped back before emotion betrayed her. The Tycoon glanced at her again, sharper this time, as if measuring an unspoken variable. In the hallway near the restrooms, Valeria pressed her hands against the cool tiles, grounding herself. Anger surged beneath her ribs. Quiet, disciplined anger. How many nights had she walked back to that apartment after 11-hour shifts, believing endurance would eventually equal progress? And now strangers with leather portfolios had decided its fate between appetizers and the main course. She exhaled slowly, wiping any trace of vulnerability before returning to the dining room. When she returned, their voices had softened. Dessert wine had been poured. The executives leaned closer, eager to decipher the Tycoon's expression. The manager hovered nearby, pretending not to monitor every word. As Valeria replaced a basket of bread, one executive said, "Sentimentality can't interfere with necessary progress. People adapt when given incentives. Progress. Incentives." Words polished enough to hide displacement beneath syllables. The Tycoon tapped the rim of his glass thoughtfully. "You're assuming adaptation is equitable," he said. His tone was mild, but the words carried weight. The executives exchanged quick glances, uncertain whether he was challenging or testing them. Valeria paused briefly, sensing a subtle fracture in the confidence they had performed all evening. The younger executive rushed to recover. "We simply mean tenants rarely understand the value of redevelopment. They cling to outdated spaces. Outdated spaces." The phrase pulsed painfully in her ears. Outdated was the small kitchen where she and her mother shared late-night tea. Outdated was the window that whistled in winter, yet held memories no luxury renovation could replicate. Outdated was everything she worked to keep intact. Then the Tycoon looked directly at Valeria. "What's your name?" he asked. The question startled the executives, who stared at him as though he'd broken unspoken etiquette. Valeria steadied her breath. "Valeria, sir." She kept her voice professional, guarded. Names were dangerous in rooms where decisions traveled quickly. The Tycoon nodded slowly, as if committing the syllables to memory. "Thank you, Valeria," he said again, and the sincerity in his tone unsettled her more than the question. Gratitude from powerful men often carried hidden terms. She stepped back, pulse racing, uncertain whether she had been acknowledged or marked. The executives looked irritated, as though a moment had been wasted on someone outside their calculations. At the service station, whispers circulated among staff. "He's deciding a major contract tonight," someone murmured. Millions on the table, but money wasn't what Valeria feared. It was the way her building had appeared in their packet. The quiet collision of his world and hers. Two lines on a diagram that never should have intersected. Lucia approached her with a concerned look. "Be careful tonight," she murmured. "He's perceptive. He notices reactions most people hide." Valeria nodded, though she didn't know whether caution was even possible anymore. Something in her had already shifted when she saw that address. She felt it, a slow awakening she hadn't expected. The check was printed. The manager intercepted it immediately, eager to handle the final moment himself. He approached the table with reverence, presenting the folder as though delivering a sacred offering. The Tycoon reviewed the bill quickly, signed with practiced efficiency, then paused, pen hovering above the paper. A silence stretched. "Who served this table?" he asked quietly. The manager beamed. "Lucia, sir. One of our finest." The Tycoon's gaze did not move to Lucia. It moved to Valeria, steady, intentional, unreadable. "Both of them," he said. "Bring them." The manager's smile faltered before he forced it back into place. As Valeria walked toward the table, each step felt heavier, as though the gravity of the moment had shifted. The city glittered behind the windows, vast and indifferent. Inside, the Tycoon watched her with calm curiosity, the kind that suggested he had already noticed something she hadn't realized she revealed. "Sit," he said gently, gesturing to the empty chairs. Staff did not sit with guests, yet his tone allowed no refusal, and as she lowered herself into the seat, Valeria knew something irrevocable had begun, something she was no longer able or willing to ignore. He asked them to sit, and the simple instruction rearranged the room around Valeria. Chairs scraped softly across polished floors, but the sound felt amplified, like the beginning of a ceremony she didn't remember agreeing to. Lucia hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking her seat, but Valeria lowered herself carefully, conscious of every breath. No staff member ever sat at a guest's table, much less at a man whose silence carried weight. Up close, the Tycoon's presence was even more disorienting. His confidence wasn't the kind earned through vanity or performance. It was quieter, the kind that suggested he had survived storms no one else had witnessed. The candlelight softened his expression, giving him an almost contemplative stillness. For a moment, Valeria forgot about the executives shifting uncomfortably beside him, forgotten players in a scene they thought they controlled. She folded her hands to keep them steady. "You both handled the evening well," he said, tone deceptively simple. The executives exchanged irritated glances, clearly unhappy that praise was being redirected. Lucia smiled politely, but Valeria remained composed, unsure whether responding would be appropriate. Compliments from regular guests were common enough, but compliments from him felt dangerous. Like stepping toward a door without knowing if it led to a hallway or a cliff. She forced her shoulders to stay level. "Tell me," he continued, "how long have you each worked here?" Lucia answered first, discussing her years of service, her promotions, the pride she took in her craft. He listened attentively, nodding as though memorizing each detail. When his gaze returned to Valeria, she felt it almost physically. "And you?" he asked. She straightened slightly. 2 years, she said. Part-time at first, then full-time. Her voice remained steady, though her heartbeat quickened. He studied her, not in the predatory way some wealthy guests did, but with curiosity, real curiosity, the kind that sought context rather than advantage. "Why here?" he asked softly. Not, "What do you do?" but "Why?" The question sank into her like an anchor. She glanced at the executives, who looked increasingly irritated, but his attention stayed on her, waiting with patience that unnerved her more than pressure ever had. Valeria's throat tightened. She had prepared answers for job interviews, scholarship essays, her mother's worried questions, never for moments like this. "Because I needed stability," she said quietly, "and because places like this teach you how to move in the world, even if the world doesn't always make room for you." Lucia looked at her with subtle surprise, sensing the weight beneath the words. The Tycoon's expression shifted, thoughtful, almost impressed. One executive cleared his throat loudly, attempting to reclaim authority. "Sir?" Regarding the acquisition, the Tycoon lifted a hand, silencing him instantly. His attention did not waver from Valeria. "Interesting," he murmured. "You speak about space differently than most people I meet." The remark unsettled her. She had not intended to reveal anything meaningful, yet he drew significance from every syllable. It felt as though he already understood more than she wanted him to. The second executive leaned forward, forcing a tight smile. "She's a server, sir," he said with a tone meant to diminish. "Her perspective is limited." The Tycoon turned his head slowly, the room cooling by degrees. "Limited," he repeated, tasting the word. "Or unfiltered?" His gaze sharpened and the executive leaned back, swallowing the rest of his sentence. Valeria watched the exchange with astonishment, unsure what was happening or why he was defending her. The Tycoon shifted slightly, folding his hands atop the table. "Tell me, Valeria," he said. "Where do you live?" The question struck like a sudden drop in temperature. She hesitated, aware of the executive's interest sharpening at the same moment. "East 49th, she answered cautiously. "Small apartment." His eyes narrowed. Not in suspicion, but recognition. He had heard the address earlier. She saw the exact moment understanding clicked behind his gaze. "That building," he said slowly. is part of the proposal they presented tonight. One executive jumped in. A very promising investment opportunity, sir. The units are outdated, the tenants low value for the area. He stopped when the Tycoon's eyes flickered. Not anger, something colder, sharper. Valeria felt her stomach twist. Her home, her mother's home, had been dissected across documents without her knowing she had been standing beside them. Lucia reached under the table and touched Valeria's knee lightly, a gesture of solidarity that helped her steady her breath. The Tycoon leaned back, regarding the executives with a calm that made them visibly anxious. Low value, he repeated, voice quiet. Strange terminology when you're speaking about people. The younger executive faltered. We only meant, but the Tycoon cut him off with a raised brow. I know what you meant, he said. Then he looked at Valeria again. How long have you lived there? She swallowed. 4 years. My mother, longer. Her voice tightened despite her effort to sound composed. The Tycoon absorbed this silently. Something in his expression shifted. Not pity, never pity, but recognition. As if her answer aligned a piece of a puzzle he had not realized was incomplete. The candle flame fluttered between them, casting unsteady light across the table. Do you like living there? He asked. It was such an absurd question that she nearly laughed. Like? It wasn't about liking. It was about necessity, endurance, the quiet dignity of making a place livable even when the world tried to reshape it. It's home, she said instead. Not perfect, but home. Lucia nodded subtly, acknowledging the truth beneath the softness. The executives looked bored, as though sentiment were an inconvenience. The Tycoon smiled slightly, not with amusement, but appreciation. Most people I meet talk about assets, he said. You talk about places the way others talk about memories. His words unsettled her. She wasn't sure whether he was complimenting or dissecting her. Behind him, the city lights shimmered like a field of tiny, watchful eyes. The room had grown quieter, though she wasn't sure if that was real or something happening only inside her chest. One executive leaned in again. Sir, with all due respect, we should finalize the redevelopment timeline. The Tycoon didn't look at him. Redevelopment, he said. Interesting word. Politically convenient. Emotionally void. The younger executive stiffened, sensing the conversation slipping beyond his control. Valeria felt tension building like a wire drawn too tight, the kind that snapped without warning. Her pulse thudded at her throat. Something in the air felt dangerously close to tipping. The Tycoon exhaled slowly, then turned back to Valeria with an expression more open than before. You said earlier the world doesn't always make room for you, he said. Has that been your experience often? His question held no mockery. Instead, it carried a weight she wasn't prepared for. A question that peeled back layers she normally protected. She looked down at her hands. Often enough, she whispered. But I learned to stand anyway. Lucia nodded softly beside her, a quiet affirmation of battles fought behind polished service smiles. The Tycoon's gaze softened, something shifting in him that wasn't easily defined. Resilience is undervalued, he said. People think it appears naturally. They forget it is carved. The executives exchanged exasperated looks, clearly unprepared for philosophical detours. But something in the Tycoon's voice suggested these detours mattered more than spreadsheets ever had. Then he leaned back slightly, studying her as though evaluating a rare instinct rather than a resume. If circumstances forced you to leave that apartment, he said carefully, what would happen? The question pierced deeper than he knew. Her mother's medications, her night shifts, the shoes she stretched until the seams whispered. Everything trembled beneath the weight of eviction. We'd manage, she said softly. We always do. But her voice betrayed the cost of that truth. For the first time, the Tycoon's composure cracked, barely but visibly. A faint crease appeared between his brows. He glanced at the executives as though reassessing them entirely. Interesting, he murmured. You speak as though survival is a language. She met his eyes, unsure what compelled her. It is, she said quietly. Some of us learn it young. The moment lingered, weighted with something neither of them fully understood yet. The manager approached hurriedly, nervous energy radiating from him. Is everything satisfactory, sir? His voice trembled slightly. The tycoon didn't answer immediately. His attention remained on Valeria in a way that made the manager shift uncomfortably. Finally, the tycoon said, "Quite." But the word carried a tone suggesting the conversation had gone somewhere the staff couldn't follow. The manager retreated, sensing an invisible barrier he shouldn't cross. Silence settled between them, not awkward, but charged. The tycoon tapped his finger lightly against the table, considering something unspoken. The executives waited tensely. Valeria held her breath without realizing it. Then, with startling clarity, he asked, "Do you know why I come here, Valeria?" She blinked, startled. "No, sir." He smiled faintly. "Because this room reveals people. How they speak, how they hide, how they listen. You listened without disappearing." Heat rose in her chest. Confusion, fear, something dangerously close to pride. Before she could respond, he added quietly, "That is rare." The executive stiffened again, clearly displeased with the direction of the evening. But their discomfort no longer felt central. The restaurant noise seemed distant, fading like waves receding from shore. The tycoon watched her with unsettling calm, as though seeing something she hadn't realized she carried. Lucia glanced at Valeria, unsure whether to speak, but the tycoon continued before either woman could move. "Tell me, Valeria," he said, "if the world offered you a different place, one where you didn't have to survive so hard, would you take it?" Her breath stalled. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't pity. It was a question shaped like a key. She didn't know which door it would unlock, but she felt something shifting, irrevocably, beneath the surface of her life. He waited, patient, as though her answer mattered more than any contract the executives had presented tonight. Valeria stared at the candle flame, trembling subtly at its tip. She thought of her mother, the apartment, the narrow hallway lined with fading photographs. She thought of the Aurelius room, where she had learned how to smile through exhaustion. Then she lifted her gaze and met his eyes directly for the first time, and everything inside her rearranged. The tycoon didn't speak. Neither did she. For a moment, the world narrowed to a fragile thread stretched between them, curiosity on one end, fear on the other, and something unnameable in the space between. The executives shifted impatiently, oblivious to the quiet fault line forming across the table. When the tycoon finally leaned forward slightly, the candlelight caught the edge of his expression. Something decisive flickered there. She felt the air thicken. Something was coming. And then, with the same calm that had unsettled her since the moment he arrived, he said, "There's something I want to offer you." The word struck like a shockwave through the table, through her chest, through the delicate structure of the night. Lucia inhaled sharply. The executives froze. Valeria felt her heartbeat stumble as the world tilted toward a direction she had never imagined, and one she could no longer avoid seeing. His words hovered between them with a weight that stole the breath from the room. Valeria felt every pair of unseen eyes, every ripple of tension, every suspended possibility. He didn't rush to explain. Instead, he studied her with unsettling calm, giving her time to understand that whatever he was about to propose wasn't casual. The executives shifted impatiently, but the tycoon seemed almost immune to their urgency, as though only her reaction mattered now. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet enough that only their table could hear. "Your building," he said, choosing each syllable with care. "It doesn't need to be on their list." Valeria blinked, unsure whether she heard correctly. The younger executive stiffened. "Sir," he started, but the tycoon raised a hand, silencing him with effortless authority. Lucia looked at Valeria, eyes widening, unable to disguise her astonishment at the unexpected shift. "I can remove it," the tycoon continued. "I can intervene before any contract is finalized." The executives leaned forward, panic flickering in their eyes. "That would destabilize the model," one protested. "It would reduce projected gains." The tycoon ignored them completely. His gaze remained on Valeria, steady, almost gentle. "But I don't make decisions based solely on gains," he said. "Not anymore." The last two words carried a gravity that hinted at buried history. Valeria absorbed the offer with disbelief swirling beneath her ribs. People like him didn't alter investment plans for strangers. People like him didn't carve exceptions in a world built on rules she had never written. "Why?" she whispered. the question trembling from a place she couldn't shield. For a moment, he looked away, as though choosing what truth to reveal. When his eyes returned to hers, there was something unguarded in them. "Because I know what it means to lose a home," he said quietly. The table stilled, even the executives forced into silence. He didn't elaborate immediately. The words hung like an echo from a distant memory. "I grew up in a building not so different from yours," he continued, "before the world learned my name, before money blurred the outlines of where I came from." His expression softened, shadowed by a truth he rarely admitted. Lucia leaned back slightly, understanding deepening across her face. The executives remained rigid, discomfort rising as though personal narratives were contaminating their polished charts. "Sentiment can affect judgment," one muttered, trying to regain control. The tycoon didn't bother to respond. He seemed uninterested in justifying the parts of himself that didn't fit their formulas. Valeria watched him closely, quietly shaken by the sincerity beneath his polished exterior. "But I won't decide for you," he said. "It must come from your voice, not my interference." Valeria tensed at the implication. He wasn't simply offering protection. He was offering agency, a rarity in a world that often denied it. The executives shifted irritably, sensing the direction slipping further from their grasp. Their anxious glances only made the moment heavier. A silent clash between spreadsheets and lives lived between narrow walls. "What would you need from me?" Valeria asked, bracing for a condition she wouldn't be able to meet. But the tycoon's expression remained unreadable. "Honesty," he said simply. "Not obedience, not gratitude. Just honesty." The simplicity unsettled her more than a demand would have. Honesty was far more dangerous. It required vulnerability, exposure, something she had spent years carefully concealing beneath polite smiles and measured steps in crowded dining rooms. Before she could respond, the younger executive lunged forward with frantic urgency. "Sir, this is unprofessional," he insisted. "Her situation is irrelevant to the acquisition. We cannot let personal interest derail long-term objectives." The tycoon finally turned toward him, expression cooling. "Personal interests?" he echoed. "You reduce a person's life to a rounding error and call it objective?" The executive swallowed hard, visibly shrinking beneath the quiet reprimand. Valeria felt torn between gratitude and fear. This wasn't just kindness, it was power bending around her in ways she couldn't control. She had never been in a room where her silence shaped outcomes, where men with expensive watches waited on her next word. She wanted to disappear into the shadows, yet something inside her urged her to stay present. The collision of both instincts left her breathless, unsure which part of herself she could trust. The tycoon seemed to notice her inner tension. "You don't owe me anything," he said gently. "If you prefer, I'll walk away from the table and say nothing. Your fate will remain yours, not mine." His voice lowered, quiet enough to feel intimate without being intrusive. "But if you want help, I'll give it, without expecting repayment." The executives bristled at the promise, their projected profits dissolving with every word he spoke. Lucia cleared her throat softly, a subtle reminder that Valeria wasn't alone. Still, the choice felt heavier than anything she'd faced. "I don't understand why my life matters to someone like you," Valeria whispered. The tycoon didn't flinch at the vulnerability in her voice. "Because I remember being unseen," he replied. "I promised myself that if I ever had the power to alter someone's path, I wouldn't look away." A quiet hush spread across the table. Even the city's glow through the window seemed to dim, as though the moment pulled the world into tighter focus. Valeria felt her pulse thrum in her ears, the room tilting slightly with the weight of possibility. She wasn't sure whether she was being offered salvation or temptation. Both felt equally perilous, equally capable of reshaping everything she thought she understood about her life. The older executive tried once more to intervene. "Sir, with respect, the acquisition is time-sensitive. Every delay creates risk." The tycoon turned toward him, voice firm. "Then let it risk something real for once." The executive recoiled, stunned into silence. Valeria watched the exchange with bewilderment. She wasn't accustomed to being defended, especially not by someone whose decisions affected skylines. The surrealness pressed against her, almost disorienting. A waiter passed behind her, unaware that the trajectory of 3 lives had shifted at this single table. The clatter of dishes and distant laughter from other guests returned faintly, as though seeping in from another world altogether. Valeria inhaled slowly, grounding herself. "If you help me," she asked, "won't you create enemies?" The Tycoon's lips curved faintly. "I've had enemies for decades," he said, "but very few reasons worth having them." Her breath caught at the implication. He wasn't afraid of conflict. He was offering her a place at the center of it. Lucia squeezed her hand lightly beneath the table, urging her to listen to herself. Valeria felt emotion rising behind her ribs, a mixture of disbelief and fragile hope. It felt dangerous to hope. Hope had teeth. Hope could wound as deeply as loss. Yet she felt it anyway, trembling and persistent. "Why tonight?" she whispered. "Why me?" The Tycoon leaned forward slightly, candlelight brushing the contours of his face. "Because you did something rare," he said. "You looked at the world without shrinking. You stood inside a system designed to erase you, and still spoke with dignity." She flushed, startled by the intensity of his observation. She hadn't realized he'd seen anything worth noting. She'd only been surviving the night. For the first time, she felt the executive's resentment burn through their forced professionalism. To them, she was an obstacle, one they had never considered worthy of notice. Their discomfort vibrated across the table, a sharp reminder of the delicate balance hanging between power and vulnerability. But the Tycoon was unmoved by their tension. His focus remained solely on her, unwavering, unsettling, impossibly steady. "If I refuse your help?" she asked softly. His answer was immediate. "Then nothing changes. You return to your life. I complete my business. And this moment becomes just another night in a room full of strangers." The simplicity of the scenario struck her deeply. It made the choice feel both impossibly heavy and strangely clear. Nothing forced, nothing promised, only possibility suspended between 2 breaths. "And if I accept?" she whispered. His gaze held hers, a slow current of intent moving beneath the surface. "Then your life intersects with mine," he said. "And I don't make small intersections." Lucia exhaled sharply, understanding the magnitude behind his words. Valeria felt her heartbeat falter, caught between fear and something dangerously close to curiosity. She couldn't tell whether she was stepping toward salvation or into a storm. She looked down at her hands, searching for steadiness. The faint tremor in her fingers betrayed the gravity of what lay before her. She had spent years adapting, shrinking, maneuvering around obstacles that refused to move. Now, for the first time, someone powerful enough to dismantle those obstacles was offering to shift them entirely. The idea frightened her more than the obstacles ever had. The Tycoon waited without pressure, allowing the silence to settle naturally. The executive seethed quietly, watching their carefully constructed plans unravel. Lucia hovered in quiet solidarity. Valeria felt the strange sensation of being pulled toward a threshold she never expected to approach. The world felt suspended, shimmering with possibilities she had no map for. Finally, she lifted her gaze, meeting his with a steadiness she didn't fully feel. "I need to think," she said softly. He nodded, accepting her uncertainty with surprising ease. "Then think," he replied. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight." The executives deflated with relief, but only for a moment. The Tycoon's eyes never left Valeria, and something unspoken passed between them. An understanding that the question itself had changed everything, whether she answered it now or not. As he rose from the table, the night seemed to rearrange itself around his departure. His coat rested over his arm, his movements unhurried, deliberate. Before leaving, he looked at her one final time. "When you're ready," he said quietly, "you'll know where to find me." Then he walked toward the exit, leaving the executive stunned, Lucia breathless, and Valeria trembling with a realization she could no longer deny. Her life had begun to shift, and there was no returning to the version she had been before. When the Tycoon left the Aurelius room, the silence he abandoned felt strangely alive, as if the walls were still absorbing the imprint of his presence. Valeria remained seated for several seconds after the door closed, unable to steady her breath. Lucia squeezed her hand once more before standing. "Whatever this becomes," she whispered. "It started tonight." Valeria wasn't sure whether that truth brought comfort or dread. She rose slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. The executives wasted no time reclaiming their voices. Unacceptable, one muttered. He jeopardized the acquisition for a server. The bitterness in his tone hit like a slap. Valeria avoided his gaze, knowing he saw her as an inconvenience, a loose thread unraveling months of calculated ambition. She felt no guilt for it. Instead, she felt something unfamiliar. A pulse of defiance she had never allowed herself to consider. It throbbed quietly beneath her ribs, steady and undeniable. You should be careful, the younger executive hissed as she passed. Your name is on his radar now. The warning carried no concern, only threat. Valeria continued walking, refusing to dignify the remark. Power made some men cruel. Proximity to power made others desperate. She reminded herself that their frustrations belonged to them, not her. But beneath her calm steps, unease twisted inside her. Being seen by the Tycoon came with consequences she didn't yet understand. In the kitchen, the rush of late-night service resumed, pots clattering, cooks shouting orders that cut through the haze of her thoughts. Marco eyed her suspiciously, sensing disruption he couldn't name. What did you do? He asked bluntly. He never talks to staff. Valeria shook her head. Nothing, she murmured. He just asked questions. Marco snorted. Rich men don't ask questions unless they want something. The implication sank into her spine like a cold blade. When her shift ended, exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. She gathered her things slowly, unsure how to face the night outside. Lucia approached with her coat, concern etched in the lines around her eyes. Go home, she urged. Sleep before you start inventing monsters. Valeria smiled weakly, grateful for the attempt at comfort, but she knew sleep wouldn't come easily. Too many possibilities whispered at the edges of her thoughts. The street outside was quieter than usual, the city softened by late-hour fatigue. Valeria pulled her coat tight as she walked east, the familiar path to her apartment blurring beneath the weight of the evening. Every streetlight, every window, every passing taxi seemed touched by the memory of the Tycoon's eyes on hers. She realized abruptly how precarious her life had always been. Tonight merely illuminated the fragility she had grown accustomed to overlooking. When she reached her building, she stopped at the bottom of the stairs, staring at the weathered brick facade. It looked the same as always. Cracked paint, uneven steps, a flickering hallway light, but something inside her recoiled. This place, once a sanctuary, now felt temporary. Negotiable. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step echoing with the question she hadn't dared ask aloud. What if this home was never truly hers to keep? Her mother was asleep when Valeria entered the apartment, soft snores drifting from the bedroom. Valeria stood in the doorway, watching the rise and fall of her mother's breath. She wanted to tell her about the Tycoon, about the offer, about the building appearing in documents she wasn't meant to see. But the sight of her mother sleeping peacefully silenced the words. Tonight's chaos did not belong in this fragile room. Not yet. She moved into the kitchen, sitting at the small table where so many late-night conversations had unfolded. The Tycoon's question resurfaced, heavy and persistent. If the world offered you a different place, would you take it? Valeria stared at her reflection in the darkened window. She didn't recognize the expression staring back. It held fear, yes, but also something sharper. Something like the first spark of ambition long buried under necessity. A vibration broke the silence. Her phone lit up with a new email. For a moment she hesitated, fearing another notice from the landlord. Instead, the subject line read, Regarding your building, confidential. Her breath stilled. The sender's name was unfamiliar, but the domain was the Tycoon's corporate office. She opened the message cautiously, scanning the text with growing disbelief. Attached was a document titled, Acquisition Freeze Request. Immediate hold pending review. Her chest tightened. At the bottom, a brief note sat alone. He asked that you be informed first. Valeria's hands trembled, not just with relief, but confusion. Why notify her? Why involve her at all? She wasn't accustomed to being prioritized, especially not by men whose decisions shaped entire neighborhoods. Yet here she was, reading an email that suggested her home wasn't slipping through her fingers after all. The realization left her dizzy, suspended between gratitude and unease. She closed the laptop gently, unable to process more. The apartment felt too small for the enormity of what had shifted. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears as the Tycoon's voice replayed in her mind. I don't make small intersections. She wondered what kind of intersection this was becoming, and whether she was prepared for its consequences. The thought frightened her more than losing the apartment ever had. Sleep eluded her. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks illuminated by stray moonlight. She had survived years of uncertainty, juggling shifts, studying during lunch breaks, stretching paychecks until the seams burst. But this, being seen, being chosen, being drawn into someone else's world, felt far more destabilizing. She didn't want to owe anyone, especially not a man with enough influence to alter her future effortlessly. And yet she couldn't ignore what he had done. The next morning brought no clarity. She prepared for work mechanically, avoiding her mother's questions about the dark circles beneath her eyes. On her walk to the Aurelius room, the city felt different, charged with invisible currents. Passing strangers seemed to study her too long, though she knew it was only her nerves projecting shadows. Even the restaurant's golden facade appeared more imposing, as if aware of the storm brewing quietly around her. Inside, the staff buzzed with leftover rumors from the night before. When she entered the locker area, conversations stalled abruptly. A few servers exchanged glances, whispers trailing behind her like faint, lingering perfume. Lucia appeared moments later, guiding her toward the prep station. Ignore them, she said. People fear what they don't understand. Valeria tried to smile, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her. The night had marked her, whether she wanted it to or not. Marco eyed her with suspicion as he arranged cutlery. So, he said casually, you have important friends now? His tone dripped with something between envy and caution. Valeria didn't rise to the bait. No, she answered, just complicated conversations. Marco chuckled humorlessly. Everything becomes complicated when men like him take an interest. His words left a chill in their wake, but she refused to let them burrow under her skin. During setup, the manager approached her with a rehearsed smile that didn't reach his eyes. You're needed in the office, he said. Her pulse quickened. She followed him down the hallway, uncertain what awaited her. Inside the small office, a man in a dark suit stood waiting, not the Tycoon, but someone representing him. The stranger extended a folder. He asked that this be delivered to you directly. The room tilted slightly. She accepted it with trembling hands. The folder contained a letter written in the Tycoon's distinct, measured handwriting. It wasn't long, less than a page, but each sentence carried weight. He acknowledged the freeze request, clarified that no decisions concerning the building would move forward without her knowledge, and added a line that made her breath falter. This isn't charity. It's respect. You deserve that much. She closed the folder slowly, overwhelmed by the balance of bluntness and sincerity. Beneath the letter lay something else, a business card embossed with understated elegance. His direct contact. No assistants, no gatekeepers, a number only a handful of people likely possessed. She stared at it as though it might vanish if she blinked. The manager watched her with feigned indifference, but she noticed the jealousy tightening his jaw. She slipped the card into her pocket before he could comment, unwilling to give him more questions to weaponize. When she returned to the dining room, the world looked deceptively unchanged. Tables gleamed, glasses sparkled, and guests murmured their expectations into the golden light. Yet something inside her had shifted irrevocably. She felt taller somehow, as though the weight pressing on her chest for years had loosened just enough to allow breath. Still, fear coiled beneath the surface. Influence this large was a double-edged sword, capable of salvation or ruin. Lucia approached quietly, her eyes full of questions she dared not voice. You okay? She asked. Valeria nodded, though the truth was more complex. He sent a letter, she whispered. Lucia's eyebrows lifted. Of course he did, she murmured. Men like him don't leave unfinished sentences. Valeria wasn't sure whether the comment was comfort or warning. She folded her apron, grounding herself in the familiar rituals of service. They were steadying, predictable, safe. As lunch service began, Valeria moved through the dining room with quiet precision. But her thoughts remained tangled around the Tycoon's offer, the letter, The possibility he had opened like an uninvited door. She wondered whether destiny could pivot on a single night, or if this was simply another illusion spun by power. Each time the front doors opened, her breath caught, half expecting him to appear again, reshaping the atmosphere with his arrival. Near the end of her shift, she stepped into the hallway to catch her breath. The golden light filtering through the small window cast soft shadows across her hands. She looked at her reflection in the glass. Not the tired server she saw every morning, but someone standing on the edge of transformation. Someone who finally understood that choices once offered demanded courage. The realization both frightened and exhilarated her. She reached into her pocket and touched the card, the small, unassuming rectangle that now carried the weight of impossible possibilities. She wasn't ready to call him. She wasn't ready to decline either. What she was ready for, perhaps for the first time in her life, was the idea of choosing a path rather than surviving one. And that, more than anything he had offered, felt like the true beginning of something irreversible. As she stepped back into the dining room carrying a tray of water glasses, she felt the world steady beneath her feet. Whatever came next, opportunity, danger, transformation, she knew one truth clearly. The night she met the Tycoon had not been an accident. It had been a hinge moment, a quiet turning point disguised as a simple shift at the Aurelius room. And somewhere out in the city, she sensed he already knew she wasn't done answering him. For the next 2 days, Valeria carried the Tycoon's card everywhere, inside her pocket at work, under her pillow at night, tucked beside her toothbrush in the morning. It wasn't the card itself that unsettled her. It was the knowledge it represented. Power had acknowledged her. Power had paused its stride for her. And now it waited, patient, almost courteous, as though she were the one holding leverage instead of the other way around. She didn't speak of it to her mother. Each morning, she watched the older woman shuffle through the apartment, humming softly as she boiled water for tea. There was comfort in those routines, small certainties that grounded Valeria's life. She feared burdening her mother with the storm that had entered their orbit. For now, she let silence protect them both, though the weight of secrecy thickened the air between their conversations. At the Aurelius room, the staff observed her with new wariness. Some whispered that she must have done something extraordinary. Others believed she had violated unspoken boundaries. Envy threaded through the corridors like an invisible draft. But Valeria moved carefully, refusing to let their assumptions shape her steps. She had endured far worse than rumors. Still, the subtle shift in atmosphere followed her everywhere, brushing her shoulders like an unwelcome shadow. Lucia remained her single refuge. "He'll come back," the older woman said one evening as they polished glasses. "Men like him don't start conversations they don't intend to finish." Valeria wasn't sure whether the thought frightened or reassured her. "I don't know what he wants," she admitted softly. Lucia shook her head. "You know exactly what he wants. You just don't know if you're ready to want anything in return." Her break arrived and she stepped outside into the cold air. The city's noise wrapped around her like a restless tide. She leaned against the building's stone facade, letting the air sting her cheeks awake. The Tycoon's letter replayed in her mind, each line carrying gravity that refused to fade. Respect, he had written. Not charity. Not transaction. She had never been offered respect by someone with the power to devastate her world. Across the street, construction scaffolding rattled as wind threaded through metal bars. Workers shouted directions, their movements brisk and methodical. She wondered how many buildings in the city had once belonged to people like her, tenants who had lived quietly until someone with a folder of plans erased them. The thought chilled her more than the winter air. Survival wasn't just a language. It was a negotiation she had never been invited to join. That night, when she reached her apartment, she found an envelope taped to the door. Her pulse spiked instantly. Too many bad news moments had arrived in this exact way. But when she peeled it free, she saw the landlord's handwriting. Inside was a formal notice confirming that the building's sale had been placed on indefinite hold. No explanation, no reasoning, just a single sentence. All tenant concerns will be reviewed before any further discussions. She sank onto the stairwell, relief flooding her muscles, loosening knots she hadn't realized she carried. But beneath that relief flickered something sharper, curiosity mixed with fear. The Tycoon had intervened. There was no other explanation. And now she owed him, what, gratitude? Conversation? A decision she hadn't yet deciphered? She pressed her forehead against the cool metal railing, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had shifted in silence. Later that evening, sleep evaded her again. She lay on her mattress, staring at the ceiling as moonlight crawled across the cracks. The Tycoon's presence lingered in every corner of her thoughts. Not his wealth, not his authority, his attention, the unsettling precision with which he noticed her, as though seeing what others overlooked came naturally to him. That awareness carried both promise and danger. Perhaps more danger than she wanted to admit. By morning, exhaustion had settled behind her eyes. She dressed slowly, forcing herself into the rhythm of work despite frayed nerves. At the restaurant, the usual shimmer of gold and quiet hush of luxury pressed around her like a familiar veil. Yet she felt outside of herself, watching her own movements from a slight distance. She wondered how long one moment could stretch its influence before dissolving into memory. During setup, the manager approached her with a message. "You have a visitor waiting in the atrium." His tone gave nothing away. Fear tightened her chest. She wiped her palms on her apron before stepping into the corridor. The atrium's high windows bathed the space in pale light, illuminating a figure standing with his back toward her. For a heartbeat, she thought it was him. But when the man turned, he was a stranger. He introduced himself as the Tycoon's legal advisor. His presence was calm, unobtrusive, carrying none of his employer's thunderous aura. "He asked me to deliver something," the man said, handing her a sealed envelope. "No urgency. He simply wanted you to have it." Valeria hesitated before accepting it. The envelope was heavier than she expected, its weight disproportionate to its size. The advisor inclined his head politely before departing. She retreated to the staff lounge, breaking the seal with trembling fingers. Inside lay a handwritten note and a second envelope. The note read, "This is not a debt. Use it only if you choose to. VH." Her stomach tightened. She opened the second envelope and froze. It contained a document granting her temporary legal protection regarding tenancy rights, a safeguard rarely offered to tenants without extensive legal battles. Her breath caught. This wasn't a gesture. It was power, handed to her quietly. Fear mingled with awe. She had never been protected by anything stronger than her own persistence. Now she held a legal barrier capable of shielding her from displacement. But along with protection came a question she could no longer avoid. Why had he chosen her? What invisible thread tied her life to his? She folded the documents carefully, pressing her palm against them as if anchoring herself to something solid in an unpredictable world. At lunch service, she worked with mechanical precision, but her thoughts drifted constantly. Each time the entrance doors opened, she looked up instinctively, searching for a tall silhouette framed in winter light. Half of her hoped he would appear. Half of her hoped he wouldn't. She feared what came next, yet feared even more the possibility of nothing happening at all. Limbo was its own kind of torment. When her break arrived again, she stepped out into the alley behind the restaurant, breathing in the crisp air. She closed her eyes, replaying his final words from that night. "When you're ready, you'll know where to find me." She wondered what readiness meant to him. Certainty? Courage? Desperation? She had spent her life reacting to circumstance, not choosing it. Choice felt like a dangerous privilege. Pulling the card from her apron pocket, she stared at the embossed lettering. The number gleamed softly under the weak daylight. For a long moment she held it between her fingers, feeling its edges press into her skin. This small object represented a threshold, one she wasn't sure she could cross without losing pieces of herself she had spent years protecting. Still, something inside her shifted, subtle but undeniable. A quiet resolve unfurled beneath the fear. Not blind trust, not surrender, but a willingness to step toward possibility instead of away from it. She wasn't ready to call him. Not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but she felt the first steady beat of a decision forming, slow and deliberate, like footsteps approaching from a distance. She slipped the card back into her pocket, exhaling softly as she re-entered the restaurant. The golden light greeted her, familiar yet transformed by everything she now carried. And though the future remained uncertain, a single truth crystallized inside her with startling clarity. She was no longer moving through the world unseen. and sooner or later she would choose whether to answer the man who had noticed her first. Days passed with an unusual stillness, as though the world were holding its breath around Valeria. She moved through the Aurelius room like a ghost wearing her own face, performing tasks with precision, but existing half a step outside herself. Even Lucia noticed the quiet tension in her movements. "You're waiting for something," she whispered one afternoon. Valeria didn't deny it. Waiting had become a second heartbeat, pulsing softly beneath everything she did. What she waited for, however, was less certain. Not a message, not another envelope, not even the Tycoon himself. She was waiting for the moment something inside her aligned, a clarity she couldn't force. Each night she lay awake replaying every detail of their encounter, searching for a path she couldn't yet name. The card rested beside her lamp, its presence both comforting and unbearable, a silent promise she wasn't sure she deserved. One evening, when the restaurant's lights dimmed and the last guests drifted out into the city, Valeria lingered near the windows overlooking the quiet street. Snow had begun to fall in soft spirals, catching the lamplight in delicate flashes. The Aurelius room transformed slightly in winter, its golden glow deepening into something intimate. She wrapped her arms tightly around herself, sensing a shift in the air before she understood its meaning. Footsteps approached behind her, unhurried, familiar, deliberate. Her breath caught before she turned. The Tycoon stood a few feet away, wearing a dark coat dusted with snowflakes. He didn't look out of place. He never did, but something in his expression was gentler than before, as though the cold had softened him in ways power never could. "You didn't call," he said quietly. Not accusatory, simply true. She swallowed, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I wasn't ready." He nodded as though he had expected that answer all along. "Readiness is rarely a single moment," he said. "More often, it's the accumulation of small truths we pretend to ignore." He stepped closer, not invading her space, but acknowledging it, offering presence rather than pressure. The window reflected both of their silhouettes, two figures suspended in winter light. "What brought you here tonight?" she asked softly. The question hovered between them, wrapped in unease and something tender. He considered before answering. "I didn't come to persuade you," he said. "I came because waiting without clarity can feel like a burden. I wanted to see if the burden was mine alone." His honesty unraveled something inside her, loosening knots she had carried for years without noticing their weight. Valeria moved her gaze back to the snowfall. "You changed everything," she whispered. "My building, my safety, the way people look at me here." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with naked truth. "And I don't know what you expect in return." He exhaled a low breath. "I expect nothing," he said. "But I hope for something." "There's a difference." His reflection looked steadier than she felt. She turned fully to face him. "And what is it you hope for?" The Tycoon didn't look away. "A conversation," he said. "A place where neither of us is server or investor, tenant or benefactor. Just two people deciding whether their lives intersect for reasons that matter." His words struck her with unsettling precision. He wasn't offering rescue. He wasn't offering romance. He was offering possibility. Dangerous, delicate possibility. The staff continued cleaning behind them, but the space around the two of them felt strangely insulated, as though time had slowed to accommodate the gravity of their moment. Valeria felt her pulse in her fingertips, in her throat, in the hollow between her breaths. She realized she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of what stepping toward him might awaken in herself. Ambition, vulnerability, desire, all tangled together. "Why me?" she asked. Not whispered this time. Spoken with fragile courage. The Tycoon's jaw tightened slightly, as though the question touched something he seldom allowed others to see. "Because you carry your world with dignity," he said, "even when it threatens to collapse. And because you look at people as though they're still human, long after the world has taught you otherwise." The answer made her breath shiver. Silence stretched again, but it wasn't empty. It was full of truths unspoken, fears acknowledged, doors half opened. Valeria felt her body leaning slightly toward him, drawn not by force but by recognition. She realized with startling clarity that he had not disrupted her life. He had revealed its fractures, illuminated its fault lines, and standing before him now, she no longer felt ashamed of those cracks. Slowly, She reached into her pocket and held up the card. It glimmered in the dim light. "I didn't know what this meant," she said. "I still don't." He stepped closer, his voice softer. "It means you have a choice. One you've earned. One that won't disappear if you walk away now." She studied his face, searching for deception or expectation. She found neither, only sincerity carved beneath restraint. Her fingers tightened around the card. For the first time in her life, she felt the possibility of choosing something not out of survival, but out of desire. The difference felt dizzying. She drew a slow breath, feeling her chest expand with a steadiness she hadn't known in years. "If we talk," she began carefully, "it has to be on equal ground." He nodded immediately. "Then we'll create it." The snowfall thickened beyond the windows, painting the streets with soft white silence. Valeria felt the shift inside her, small but profound, like the first unsteady step after years of bracing for impact. She lowered the card slowly, not as surrender, but as acceptance of the truth she had avoided. She wanted to understand him. She wanted to understand why he saw her, and why she wasn't afraid to be seen. "When?" she asked, her voice steady. The Tycoon's eyes flickered with something warm, almost relieved. "Whenever you choose," he said. "Tomorrow. Next week. A month from now. I'm not going anywhere." She felt the truth in his tone, grounding her in a way nothing else had. For the first time, possibility didn't terrify her. It intrigued her. It pulled her gently forward, like a light rising through fog. She glanced once more at the snow-coated street, then back at him. "Tomorrow?" she said finally, surprising even herself. His expression softened, a rare smile touching the edges of his mouth. "Tomorrow, then." The words settled between them like a quiet promise. No contract, no obligation, just a meeting of two lives no longer pretending they hadn't collided. As they walked toward the door together, she didn't feel rescued. She didn't feel claimed. She felt something far more dangerous and liberating. Chosen, not for convenience, not for utility, but for the person she had been all along, beneath the exhaustion and the service apron and the unspoken fears. When he opened the door for her, cold air rushed in, carrying winter's sharp breath across her skin. She stepped outside, letting the night wrap around her as though welcoming her into a new chapter. Behind her, the restaurant glowed like a memory, already shifting into legend. And as she walked beside him into the snowfall, she realized the truth she had been circling since the night they met. Some intersections are not accidents. Some are invitations.